Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our second Wednesday coffee break session. We have a really timely topic here, prepping for unintended academic issues, and with the school season starting in the very near future, and kids going off sometimes for the first time. We thought it would be a good idea to discuss, where we're seeing issues. Some of them are reoccurring issues, some of them are brand new, so as to give everyone some information to hopefully chat with their children and prepare them for success. So today we have one of my partners, Alex Rusek, here, who's in our Lansing office. Alex, thank you for attending today and putting together this session. This one's all on you. I know nothing about this stuff. I avoid it like the plague. So I am very glad that we have an expert in these areas to really discuss what we're seeing coming up in these academic issues. And I understand, you've unfortunately had to deal with these, in the past for some people. So something that we always want to try to avoid. So again, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me and good afternoon to everyone.
Perfect. So why don't we just dive right in because we don't have a lot of time. One of the biggest items, and this is just a transformational item like the internet was, right? Is AI. Everyone's talking about AI. There's AI issues in the law. We just saw a couple of lawyers that likely are going to face some licensing consequences and licensing sanctions, and some embarrassing moments. We've seen, students have issues with AI. I'd like to talk about AI, where you've seen issues or where you see issues coming up, because again, I think it's such a transformative, process, and let's be honest, kids are on top of technology. They're probably using it right now, right? So things may be a little bit different in college. So can you start off first by, just kind of giving us, the baseline as to what you see as far as AI and its use in academia, how common it is, and then let's talk a little bit about maybe topics like academic dishonesty and even things like deep fakes that are coming out.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you, Rob. That's a great introduction to a topic that's extremely timely right now. And how I approach AI is both as a litigator, as an attorney, but I'm also an adjunct professor at Michigan State University's College of Law. So this topic is right on point for me, close to my heart. So, what are we talking about today? We hear artificial intelligence, AI gets thrown around all over the place. Seemingly every company is now offering an AI solution.
Yep.
A lot of that's just marketing. So, what are we really talking about here, especially in the academic context? We're talking about generative AI, and
Yep.
that's an artificial intelligence program that creates something for us. So, when we're thinking about the academic setting, of course, that's going to be like writing essays, writing papers, and that's where we primarily see students using these AI tools is to replace that drafting, that research. So what these tools can do is they can summarize data for you. They can draft essentially any essay, any paper, and they now have access to the internet. So even on very current topics, it can be up to date. And like you mentioned there, Rob, where we really see this come into the classroom is in the academic dishonesty context.
Okay.
And right now, we know that students, pretty much every single grade level, are using these generative AI tools to help them complete their coursework.
Yeah.
And it's super easy. Anyone can go, even just on their phone, you can download ChatGPT, and these tools generally have a free level to them, so you're not even paying for it. But even, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds, they know how to use this technology. It's so easy today.
Yeah.
And it's easy and it produces a pretty good output. If you're not an expert and if you're not doing the research, you don't even know what that output is. Is it correct? Is it not correct?
Yeah.
Does it hallucinate, which is a
Yeah.
term that we use for AI when it's just making up issues or citations? So we do see it and we know that it's out there because of the mistakes that are made. when students are using it for essentially plagiarism because it's missing some of the fundamental understandings. And of course, that AI tool is not going to be in the classroom with that professor the same way that a student is.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I kind of think of it, I might be dating myself a little bit here, but it's the old cliff notes that we had, that we used to rely on for, reports and things like that, right? You get the summary, that big yellow book, right? They gave you, all the information you needed about Huckleberry Finn or, whatever the topic was. And a fundamental difference between using a tool like this as a reference tool, right? And to your point, a generative tool, right? If I was to take that Cliff Notes and put my name on it and hand it in as my report, that to me seems like using the generative AI in an academic dishonesty area, as opposed to using it as a resource and validating that resource and understanding the subjective material that's out there. Is that pretty much a good analysis for those of us that are over 40, let's call it?
Yeah, that is a great way to look at how generative AI is being used right now. So if you were to just buy that Cliff Notes version of the novel and you just copy and paste out of it, we know that that's plagiarism. That's pretty
Mhm.
straightforward for us. And we can go back to that guide. We can see what the words are in it, match them up, and we can say, okay, this person clearly engaged in some kind of plagiarism. And it's tempting too, especially if you are taking a heavy course load. You have a lot going on at home. Maybe you're playing sports as well. It's super tempting to just use that Cliff Notes version and copy and paste it. With
Yeah,
generative AI, it's even more tempting because it's very hard to detect that plagiarism
yeah,
because that AI tool is creating something entirely new and unique based on the prompt that was given to it.
yeah,
So it's much, much easier to use AI to, essentially plagiarize, to commit academic dishonesty
yeah.
because it's so easy, it's so simple, and it's so accessible right now.
So, and you mentioned you're an adjunct professor, right? Do schools have policies or tools that help them weed out and what happens or what could happen, right? Because obviously, things exist on a spectrum, right? What could happen if someone is caught violating these policies?
Yeah, that's a great point, Ron. And we're in this era of AI. We only really started in November of 2022. And AI has, of course, just exploded since that point of
Hmm.
becoming accessible.
Yeah.
So most educational institutions are going to have some kind of policy, even if it just defers to the professor teaching the class.
Hmm.
Some professors, recommend the use of artificial intelligence as a research tool, as an assistant to help build out, not just plagiarize what it's doing.
Yeah.
And there are some tools out there that try to detect AI. So if you have a professor who says, I'm not allowing you to use AI at all, there are some tools that purport to try to be able to find AI
Hmm.
generated text. But right now, there's no reliable way of really determining what's AI and what's not. Uh,
Well, and I laugh because I actually ran, excuse me, a lot of these tools will detect based on the prose and the tone and things like that that's used, right? And I actually ran one of my documents through an AI tool, and I laughed because it said it was probably written by AI, which says a lot about lawyers, right? Um, so I think what I'm hearing you say, right? Because I like to have a takeaway on this, right? It seems to me that the most important thing that we can do to help prepare our students, right, and our children, and those that we care about, is read and understand the AI policy, right? I mean, you go to college, you get a policy manual, yay thick, right? And they expect that you read and you know every single one of them, and maybe that's setting people up for failure, right? But I think that that's one of those policies that you really need to understand how far you can go and understand that it may vary by class. So you can't make the assumption that just because you're complying with policy A, you don't have to comply with a more restrictive policy that the teacher is setting forth. Do you think that's a good takeaway for this particular topic?
it absolutely is, Rob. And I think if someone at this point is just going to swear off of AI entirely, they're going to get left behind.
Yeah.
Uh, So we need to be checking the education institution's general policies. at a minimum, and then also paying attention to an individual professor's syllabus,
Yeah.
because those are going to set out potentially completely different sets of rules depending on which professor, you're before that given day.
Yeah. It's the argument of, the internet versus encyclopedias, right? I remember there was a TV show, Modern Family, I think it was, and the kids were forced to get off the internet, and one of the smart children, I can't remember what her name was, had to do a book report on, using encyclopedias that were 20 year old and had, bad information in it, right? So, again, I don't think we're in an age that you can completely abstain from using AI, right? To your point, you're going to get left behind. But we need to really understand where we're at on that. So, I'd like to transition because of time here to alcohol and controlled substance abuse. I know that this is an unfortunate topic. There's just by nature of the discussion today, we're dealing with some heavy items, right? This is certainly one that is close to my heart. I had a family member who had some issues with this in college, and I'd like to understand, especially with some of the changes we're seeing with respect to marijuana and things like that, right? We didn't grow up with that. Well, we didn't grow up with that as being legal, right? And the dichotomy that we have under state law and federal law, and is it recreational, is it prescription, all the different laws that have been put together to try to solve this problem here. So I definitely like to talk about marijuana, drug use, alcohol use, what the common criminal charges are, and where kids need to pay attention and what they may or may not be able to, let's just say, get away with, right? Understanding we're not giving particularized legal advice here, right? But can you kind of give us the summary of where you see alcohol and controlled substances being an issue for kids in college?
Oh, absolutely, Rob. And when I start thinking about this, I think, okay, this person may be in their first year of college. Maybe this is the first time they've ever spent any time away from home, away from their parents. They don't have any experience of being around alcohol or marijuana. And it's that exploratory kind of phase. It's all new. We don't quite know what's happening. And unfortunately, in my criminal defense practice, I represent a lot of young adults as well as children too, who find themselves in our criminal justice system. So, as a baseline for us, let's talk a little bit about what the potential crimes are out there. And hopefully, this will help clarify for our parents so that they can give advice to their kids going off for maybe that first time. So, as a baseline, federally, marijuana is still illegal. So you cannot purchase, consume, grow, or distribute any kind of marijuana or its derivatives under federal law. That one's pretty straightforward for us. We know what it is, it hasn't changed. The scheduling of marijuana has not moved in decades. So that's an easy one for us. Where we get a little bit more complicated is when we get down to the individual states. And we've seen states that are very anti-marijuana. We see states that are only supportive of marijuana use in the medical context. We see states that are okay with marijuana in medical context and then also recreational. And we fall in Michigan here into that last category, where we have legalized marijuana use for medical reasons. And then we've also legalized marijuana for just recreational use. And as most people in the state can tell now, we have dispensaries popping up everywhere.
Yep.
Even more so, I'm in Lansing. East Lansing's right next door. There's probably 2 dozen dispensaries in the local area. So it's out there. It's
I passed
every.
by 5 of them on my drive into work.
Uh, I think that you can walk from one in East Lansing, maybe about 20 yards, and you're on
Huh.
campus. So it's out there, it's all over the place. So, where does that leave us in Michigan? Under Michigan law, if you have a medical marijuana card, then you qualify to use marijuana in the medical context. If you're over 21, then you can purchase and use marijuana from a proper dispensary and use, possess, distribute, depending on what you're doing, of course. But it's pretty relaxed and it's now ubiquitous. But just like alcohol, 21 plus is still the law.
Yeah.
Um, and so this kind of takes me into, okay, what happens if you violate that law? What are we looking at? So I represent a lot of young people, like I said, who either have an alcohol or controlled substance problem. Maybe it was their first time. Maybe they were experimenting with alcohol and got themselves in trouble. All these different things. They can happen to any student. So I see a lot of minors in possession of alcohol. In Michigan, just a few years ago, we decriminalized a first offense for minors in possession. So now
Okay.
it's a civil infraction instead of a misdemeanor.
Okay.
Civil infractions are not criminal in nature. It's usually a fine, community service, and things in that vein. Now, if you were to commit multiple acts of minor in possession of alcohol, then that's going to take you up into the criminal realm where we're looking at potentially facing a misdemeanor. We also see a lot, and this is much more serious, is when that alcohol use is combined with kind of the everyday lives of students. So driving, I see a lot
Hmm.
of operating while intoxicated charges. And I also see, and this is becoming more common now, but operating while intoxicated by substances other than alcohol.
Okay.
Primarily, we're seeing that with marijuana because of its ubiquity in the state now.
Yeah.
So students need to be on just double alert there. Not only is using unlawful, but so is, engaging in certain activities. When we start talking about some of the harder drugs, cocaine, heroin, and the like, we also have severe penalties for the possession, the use, and the delivery or manufacture of those a little bit worse controlled substances.
Yeah.
So just the simple use of a controlled substance, that's usually going to be a misdemeanor. The possession of a controlled substance, it could be a misdemeanor or a felony, depending on what it is. And then, of course, the manufacturing or distribution of controlled substances would bring our most strong penalties associated with it. And we're looking only at felonies at that point.
Okay.
So there is that increase in severity, and hopefully no one ever has to go through that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I hate to say it, right? Everyone should have a lawyer on call, for criminal, right? Fine. The last thing that you want to do, and look, I'm probably the last person on this earth to give parenting advice. I know what I did to my parents, so don't want to do that to myself. But having someone that you could call if the worst happens, right? And whatever state, whatever locality the kid is, try to find someone ahead of time that you may be able to at least have a number for if you get that 3 in the morning phone call, to get representation. Because again, these are not, I don't want to say not minor things by any stretch of the imagination, right? You have to treat every single criminal issue with its due course. um, but they are not uncommon, right? It seems to be that everyone has a story of, hey, my kid did something stupid, or my friend's kid did something stupid, right? It is not decreasing. It seems like it's increasing, unfortunately. So. I'd like to transition to a different topic here because again we have a lot of wood to chop and only a small amount of time to do it. I'd like to talk about Title IX and sexual assault issues. This has long been a issue on campus. I remember when I went to college. You had the same comments about consent and things like that. Unfortunately, in today's society, right, with phones and with the amount of information that's out there and all those things, I think that having some clear guidelines may be idealistic, but I think it's something that we want to look for here to try to garner. So can we talk, let's first talk about sexual assault, then let's go into Title IX, because they are, while they're related, they are kind of two different concepts that are out there. What the issue is, what the potential crimes are, that could be committed if it's not, things aren't done correctly. and kind of how to help navigate kids through that issue who, again, may be experiencing these things for the first time, right?
Yes, and Rob, this is probably the toughest discussion that parents can
Hmm.
have. It's a super tough one. Having that conversation about artificial intelligence, that's not too bad.
Yeah.
But when we start talking about these really serious topics, it's a tough one. And I think that a lot of people avoid it for that reason. But in the environment that we're in, you cannot ignore it any longer. It has to be a discussion, and they should be had before that kid ever gets close to campus. So we have two sides of this that we're going to be talking about today. The first is the criminal side of it, and then the civil side, that's where Title IX and other statutes come in. So, as a baseline, the conversation with your child has to be that consent is always, always, always necessary before engaging in any kind of sexual activity. Now, does it have to be written? No, but you need to make sure that the person that you're engaging in these acts with is able to give consent and actually does so. And frankly, it should just be that conversation. If you're adult enough to have sex, then you're adult enough to talk with your partner. That's what needs to happen here. We see a lot of issues arise when consent is not obtained, and especially when we're talking about mixing in alcohol, marijuana, and other controlled substances into the equation, things can take a turn for the worse very, very quickly. And
Hmm.
we see sexual assault as one of the absolute most prevalent crimes on college campuses across the nation. So, what are those crimes? What do they look like? What are the potential consequences for those? So, in Michigan, we're generally going to be talking about crimes that are labeled as criminal sexual conduct, CSC. Generally, we see cases fall into four different areas depending on what happened. So we have criminal sexual conduct in the fourth degree. That's the lowest level. That is essentially a inappropriate touching of a sexual area of someone over their clothes. That's a misdemeanor in Michigan. It does come with some of the downsides, of course, but that's our least severe as far as criminal charges. We then have third degree and second degree, and then the worst is first degree. That is a what we would generally think of as a forceful rape or child sexual abuse. Falls into that CSC first most commonly. Criminal sexual conduct first degree is punishable by up to life in prison upon conviction. And that is, other than murder, that is the top penalty that we have in the state of Michigan.
Yeah.
So the consequences of engaging in that kind of behavior has just far-reaching impacts on a student that's charged with a crime. So that conviction could include, like I said, up to life in jail. It could, excuse me, life in prison. It could include jail time. That would be under a year. It could include probation or a combination of all of those. The other huge downside of being convicted is not just being put in prison or jail, but it's also being required to register for the sex offender registry. And depending on the crime that's committed, that could be for 10 years, 25 years. That could include lifetime electronic monitoring. So always wearing a GPS unit. It is one of our most heinous crimes that we have in Michigan, and it's treated extremely seriously.
Mhm.
And we really need our students to know that this is an issue. It's out there. It has to be addressed. If you see something, you need to say something too. This is a community-wide effort.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's unfortunate that we even have to deal with this, right? But the reality is we do have to deal with it, and this is also, I think, one of those crimes, certainly at least based on my limited knowledge, right? And maybe it's faulty here, but can sometimes come down to the classic, pardon the expression, he said, she said, right? Just by nature of these crimes, they tend to happen in private, right? And I'm not saying that they can't happen. You can't grope someone in a party or something like that, right? I certainly don't say that to minimize it, right? But robberies happen in public, generally speaking, right? You rob a store, there's people, there's cameras, there's things like that, right? And unfortunately, on both sides, of the equation, we've seen, bad actors, right? And making sure that that consent is out there is the best way to deal with that. I remember there was I think it was Night Live or one of those skits that was talking about sexual consent, and two people put out clipboards, fill in your name, I need a blood sample, sign here, check this box, right? And look, I get that that's not practical and not probable in today's society, right? But we should be able to have a realistic conversation with our kids about what is consent, right? And how you evaluate that, and that's based on, I think, life experience to some degree as well, which unfortunately our children just don't have when they go off to college. So can you talk a little bit about Title IX? I know we only have a few minutes left here, but I'd like to close out that topic.
Absolutely, Rob. And just to touch on one point before moving on to Title IX, if anyone has a child who's a victim of any kind of sexual assault, I just want to put it out there that it may be a he said, she said type situation there, but a victim's testimony is enough to have a conviction.
Hmm.
I also see a lot of evidence coming out now that's electronic, so phones, email,
Yeah.
all of those things also go into the equation. But I certainly do not want to dissuade anyone who's a victim of
Well,
coming forward.
yeah.
And
And Alex, before you get into Title IX, because you brought up a really good point, right? We always look at this topic from the eyes of the offender, right? And trying to prevent, someone from engaging in activities. But if you're a victim, I think that needs to be discussed with your kids as well. It's okay to come forward. It is okay to tell someone. It is not your fault, right? And some of those conversations are very tough to have, right? I think I probably did a disservice by not looking at both sides of the coin. So I'm very glad you brought that up. That's the other thing that I think parents need to chat with their kids about is, not only how do you prevent, right? And how do you make sure to do things the right way, but what happens if you are a victim of some sort of assault, right, or improper touch or whatever it is, right? How to navigate that.
that's exactly right, Rob. And it's a very tough system, but I don't want to dissuade everyone because, like I talked about before, we have the criminal side, but we also have an additional civil side to hold perpetrators accountable. So, Title IX, we've been throwing that term around very quickly. Law passed in 1970s that bans discrimination in education environments. Our courts have interpreted that to mean that any gender-based violence can be discrimination. So, this sexual assault certainly falls in the realm of Title IX. Title
Mhm.
IX proceedings, they can be a civil lawsuit against a perpetrator or someone who enabled them. Title IX can also look like internal school hearings in court, essentially. And there's a process where if someone has violated Title IX, be it an assault or some other discriminatory act, then the perpetrator can be banned from campus, can have their educational opportunities taken away from them, scholarships rescinded, pretty
Mhm.
much anything that the school can give, it can take right back.
Yeah.
So that's a great discussion. It warrants a lot more time. And I encourage parents to become acquainted, at least, with their schools or their children's schools' Title IX policies.
Sure.
Usually they're not super long. You can just flip to that part of the handbook. Uh, every single educational institution that I know of has specific procedures that'll apply in that context. So, if nothing else, parents should get out there, find that resource, talk about it with their kids, make it available to them. So, in the worst case scenario, we know how to act, who to report to, who to call.
Yeah. Yeah, and look, this is a topic that we probably spend a day or more talking about, right? Trying to condense it down into 30 minutes. Does it to some degree a disservice, right? So I think the most important takeaways that I'm hearing from this is parents really need to go through the school policies with their kids, right? And it's so easy to just get that application package and you're focusing on your schedule and you're focused on the shopping, you're focusing on how to prepare your kids for academia. but taking time to review that AI policy, taking time to review the alcohol and controlled substance policy, taking time to review the Title IX policy or any related policies that are out there. Um, I think it's a valuable investment of time for, our kids that again are going out into the world sometimes for the first time, right? Without supervision, right? And not only without supervision, but with a multitude of people who don't have supervision, right? And sometimes, bad decisions beget more bad decisions, right? So without going through a deep dive into every one of these policies, I think doing that review with a kid is probably time well spent. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Alex, I really do appreciate you taking the time to discuss this topic. I know, again, we just kind of scratched the surface on it. If anyone has any questions, Alex is an attorney in our Lansing office, kind of close to the MSU campus. And he is definitely an expert in this area. His information is going to be linked in the mailer for this coffee session here. So you should be able to reach out to him if you do have any questions. I didn't see any questions pop up in chat. So with that, I'm going to thank everyone for their time today. I'd like to remind everyone that we do have another follow-up session. I believe it is September, maybe around September 8th or so. And we will be sending out more information on that session coming up and the topic. So, again, thank you all for attending today, taking time out of your day to learn about this topic. Again, Alex, thank you so much for putting this together and bringing your words of wisdom here. And we wish everyone a fantastic week and a fantastic school year for their kids coming up.
Thanks for having me, Rob, and thanks you everyone for attending today.
Thank you all.